Hello, welcome to a beautiful morning in Scotland. It's a little more rain than I had anticipated, but I'm going to roll with it regardless. So today I'm making a video which is slightly different from my usual content. I want to talk about a topic in depth which I'm quite interested in, which is the MBTI and the Enneagram. And I want to tell you about my personal experience with it, how did I find my own type, and what has it meant for my life. So for anybody who doesn't know anything at all about MBTI, it stands for Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it pertains to 16 personality types, and it is based on Carl Jung's 8 archetypes. I'm going to be discussing the functions and function stacks that are associated with the 16 personality types. If you're not familiar with that, I suggest that you go and familiarize yourself with those before you watch the rest of the video. There is some controversy around how scientific this personality test and method is, but I find it very useful because it does recognize patterns that people have naturally in their personalities, and it sort of categorizes them into 16 different categories. I'm not going to be going into any theory here, so if you're interested, there's plenty of good MBTI channels that you can watch for reference, and they explain it pretty well. So how did I get into MBTI? As a teenager, I started to get into personality tests. I think it's quite common for teenagers to explore themselves, and they tend to look for personality tests to kind of tell them what they are. And I think it was in my early uni years that I first came across the MBTI personality test. And I took it, and my result back in the day was INFP, and I just didn't think much of it. It was just another personality test at the time. But later on, years later, I ended up coming back to it and had a more in-depth look. I did more tests at various points. I tested as INFP, INFJ, INTJ, INTP, I think even as an ISFJ at some point, but only once. Then from there I started to read all the descriptions of the type that could possibly apply, and sort of I slowly edged closer to, at the very least, resonating with one of the types more than the others. And that was the INFJ type. But it was only when I started to look into the function specifically that I gained a deeper sense of understanding what the INFJ type is truly like and all the different functions that it uses. And one very helpful thing for me was to be able to compare myself to other types. So my partner is an INFP, and he's an INFP by the book. It was very easy to type, in fact. And the fact that the INFP has all the opposite functions, not in the same places, but all the opposite functions of the INFJ, also makes it easy for me to identify them. And through being able to identify and sort of assign each function to the way we work, made it all very, very clear which type I am, and that is the INFJ. And I would like to talk you through, in some steps, through my functions and how I see them and how I think they relate to my everyday life. But before that, I want to briefly talk about the Enneagram, because this video is also my experience with the Enneagram. Now, the Enneagram is a little bit different from the MBTI in that, off the bat, it is a little more geared towards spirituality and self-development. I think it's perfectly capable of being scientific, because it's still a system that is internally congruent and can definitely be used even if you don't consider yourself a spiritual person. But the type of people that it is associated with were definitely spiritualists, psychologists. One of them was even an occultist. If you want to look into the history, I can recommend it. Now, the Enneagram I first came across when a YouTuber that I'm subscribed to did the test online. I think it was a website called eclecticenergies.com. And I think, if I remember correctly, the result that I had was type 4, and I also had a strong tendency to type 9. Now, again, I left this by the wayside, and later on I started to read a book called The Sacred Enneagram. And in this book, there's a very in-depth account of what each type is like, and what sorts of virtues and vices they have, so to speak. The man who wrote the book is a Christian, but that shouldn't, put you off the Enneagram either. After reading this book, I still wasn't quite sure yet. I think I definitely identified the traits of type 4, 5 and 9 in myself, but it took me watching a few videos that sort of went even further in depth on how the different types interact with the environment to figure out that I am in fact a type 5 Enneagram, and I am a 4-wing 5, although my tri-type is 5, 4, 9. So I definitely have a few of those 9 type qualities in my personality as well. My partner, on the other hand, is a 4-wing 5. So it's kind of like flipped around, which again made it easier to see the fine details and nuances that the two different types present, the 4 and the 5. And I would like to discuss the MBTI and the Enneagram in tandem, because to me they are very complementary. Some people would say that the MBTI is some kind of hardware. It's sort of what makes up your personality. But the Enneagram is more of a software that you have acquired during your lifetime, because it is associated with your childhood traumas and the way your caregivers interact with you, and the sort of things that you maybe become insecure about as a result of that. So for me, the Enneagram is primarily a tool for self-development and something that helps you overcome your trauma, and ultimately you're supposed to transcend your type, whereas the MBTI is more useful for self-understanding. And while there can be type fluidity, which I will talk later on about, I don't think you ever transcend your MBTI type. But for good measure, I'm also going to throw in some references to astrology, because I feel that it actually comes together very nicely in a whole holistic system. So now we will get to the in-depth discussion of each of the functions. In the case of the INFJ, we've obviously got the introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, and the introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. So I'm going to discuss them in order. The million-dollar question is, how do you know that you're using introverted intuition when the function is described as simply knowing something? How do you know? Well, I know. I mean, once I figure out, I know. But I'll give you some pointers. So I very much resonate with the way some people have put it, that they have frequent insights that seem to come out of nowhere. And that is because extroverted sensing is working in the background and picking up all sorts of information at all times. Even when I'm concentrating, it can still, come in through the back door, so to speak. I will be able to perceive it. And the way my mind works is kind of like a spider's web. So I have all these connections and all these little bits of information that I pick up at different times, and then eventually they come together. Kind of like a detective is picking up on clues, and then he's got that big internal reveal. It's like the aha moment. And it very much works like this. Whereas, in comparison then, my partner who is an INFP, his thinking is very linear. He has a sense of time which is also very linear. He can remember very specific details, whereas my understanding of the world is more superficial but broad. So I tend to pick up and be interested in lots and lots of subjects to a certain surface level, and then there's a few subjects that I then pick to become more interested in depth and sort of explore them further, but there's only so much information that I can kind of take in. So I can really handle science and maths, and I'm interested in them, but where I lose interest is where it gets simply too in-depth. So for example, I like maths, which is very hands-on and practical, but when it comes to really theoretical stuff, it just loses me, basically. The umbrella is in the shot, I hope you don't mind. I don't want to get completely soaked. So I actually did love chemistry, physics, biology, and even astronomy in school, because each of them have kind of like the system thing going on, a system that needs to be figured out, and a system that needs to be understood, but there's also lots of practical application. Whereas with maths, I kind of struggled because I struggle to understand why it's necessary, but I do also understand that maths is sort of woven into the fabrics of the universe. This is very out there, but I do kind of like understand the purpose of maths. Because introverted intuition is my primary function, it also serves as the base for my personality, which to me means being somewhat detached and also seeming detached to other people, because I'm obviously most of the time up in my head processing all this information, making connections, seeing the big picture, which to me fits perfectly with the Enneagram type 5, which is considered the observer type. They tend to be a little standoffish, observe the environment, they're a little shy when it comes to social events. Some Enneagram 5 writers even build a castle where they kind of just shut themselves away from the world. And then there is that connection with avarice. That's the so-called vice of the type 5, which manifests itself through being stingy with money, but also with energy. And this is something that I definitely know about. I'm trying to be not stingy with money, but occasionally I will sort of withhold my energy from tasks that I don't feel are completely congruent with what I want. Because I have introverted intuition and I'm Enneagram type 5, I love scanning my environment at all times. I tend to take in lots and lots of impressions all throughout. So for example, I can be walking along in a conversation and somebody who walks past, I can hear the conversation. Part of my brain registers what they're saying, and sometimes I will remark upon it to my partner if I'm talking to him. And I can sit in a cafe and I can, variably, all the conversations will sort of like come into my brain while I can do something completely different. You can maybe see the problem in this. I get overwhelmed easily if there is too much. So if a certain switch is flipped, which I call sort of the stress response, and it differs between dangerous situations and benign situations. So I feel like when I'm in a dangerous situation, my mind becomes almost razor sharp, and I can, put away all the distractions and I can really think and focus. But when it's benign, everything starts just intruding upon me. So when there's conversations, I cannot tune them out and I cannot concentrate on what I'm doing. There was one notable example where it was Christmas Day and we were at my partner's family and everybody, and their big family, and everybody was sitting around little groups having their conversations. I was reading a book and there came a point where I started to get a little stressed. I don't know why. And I wasn't just not able to tune out of anybody's conversations. And it got so much that I just had to up and leave, go to another room and be by myself. And that's typically what I need to do to stop this connection with the outside world. What I like to do is to put on headphones and listen to some loud music, typically some metal music, which is very effective at just severing that connection, where I can't hear anything apart from what I choose to hear. And it kind of makes it problematic for me to live with neighbours because they tend to make a lot of noise. And yeah, I do struggle with that from time to time. And I have to occasionally take myself away when a situation is overwhelming to me. And in tandem with that, I have also been diagnosed with ADD. I kind of think of it more as ADD rather than ADHD. but I am rather fidgety as well. And that to me means also being distracted by everything in the environment, and it's because of the reason that I just told you about. So when I study, I like to put on music in the background, preferably music that is not too dynamic, because it might still be distracting at that point. But I need to distract a part of my brain which can go and wander. Like, I can focus on the task and my brain can just come up with thoughts, but if there's music in the background, then I find it much easier to focus, whereas my partner, it seems, he doesn't like having music on in the background, or it's easier distracted by some additional source of stimulation like that, whereas I absolutely require it to be able to focus at times. With all that said, it's not going to surprise you that I'm a Gemini moon, and it fits perfectly well into everything else. Gemini moon, the very brainy intellectual. Their type of emotions aren't so watery, so to speak. They're very airy personalities, and I feel that as a Gemini moon I do crave that frequent intellectual stimulation, and to the degree where something that is too repetitive, my brain just kind of refuses to take it in anymore. So I was doing my uni degree, and there came a point where I became so bored of it, I struggled immensely to finish my uni degree. I had to go to the psychiatrist and get Ritalin prescribed to me, which worked like a charm. I guess that's kind of when you know that your ADD is real. But it also makes sense to me with the Enneagram 5 that I would be easily overwhelmed by lots of information, because the 5 has the tendency of stepping back and observing the environment. Now, the trauma that is connected to the Enneagram 5 is either being overwhelmed by a caregiver in some kind of way, or potentially also being neglected. And I feel like for me it's both, because when I was a very young child, or up to the age of 5, I was raised by my grandmother, who had a lot of time, who put a lot of effort into teaching me, but she also had a lot of love, and that felt very overbearing at times. Whereas my mother was living in a different country, finishing her degree, and she would only visit me occasionally, so you've got that overbearing plus the perceived missing that one caregiver. It actually took me a while to recognize that this is what is at the forefront of the type 5, because initially when I realized I was a type 5, I thought, well, how come this is my trauma? Because typically the type that you are is one that you can't quite see in yourself, and it takes you a while to recognize, because it is considered, part of your shadow. So in school I was able to pick up things very quickly, and that is to do with my introverted intuition working with my introverted thinking. I feel like when I have a certain concept down, it really sticks firmly, and I can really draw upon it. So most of the time in school I was using my memory, because I have a pretty good short-term memory. It really lends itself for learning new languages. That's sort of something that I'm rather good at. The children in school would ask me, oh, how do you study to get great grades? And I was at a loss what to say. I didn't study. I studied very little. I remembered what the teacher said in class. And the other children were looking at me like, oh, you just don't want to share your secret. I'm like, there is no secret. How do I bring this across? Yeah. But also, I have the tendency to, I guess, stare into space. People have noticed, like, why are you staring into space? Well, I'm thinking. And then the famous, what they call the INFJ scowl, the angry look, is like, when I'm thinking, I'm like this. And people are like, are you angry? No, not at all. There was one time where I was waiting for my friend, and she was coming towards me, and I was trying to come up with some kind of plausible scenario where she was late. And then she said to me, oh no, are you angry? So I do have a friend who has a similar problem, so I'm at that point I felt like, oh, I'm not alone. It's nice to know that other people, you know, feel this way. But yeah, my thinking phase. So I have this work colleague who was very perplexed by how I was behaving, because I wasn't being very emotional, and he thought, oh, are you hiding your emotion, or you're so shy? I wasn't feeling these emotions. I think he was expecting me to, you know, like be emotional, like like some of the women that he knows personally. But I just don't work like this, so there was always this strange disconnect of how do I bring across that this is my personality and not me being shy, and just me being, you know, logical and detached as an INFJ. There's that very good meme that says the INFJ is too thinking for the feelers and too feeling for the thinking. And I very much feel that applies to me. So let's compare that then to my INFP partner, who has introverted feeling as his primary function. And I feel like it's worlds apart. He's all about values. He has a very strong sense of, these people are good, these people are evil. And I'm always like, no, but like, let's come into the middle. Let's consider all of their perspectives. Let's consider, you know, what makes a person, you know, all their traumas, all their life experiences, what has made them the way that they are. And like, let's put all the nuance and complexity that you can possibly come up with into these things. Also, the most interesting thing, I find it fascinating, people who get hangry. My partner gets hangry. I have another INFP friend who gets hangry. So they're so bothered by being in pain or being hungry, whereas I'm not. I can be in pain, I can be hungry, I can ignore needing to go to the toilet for hours. It just doesn't affect my mood in the slightest. Whereas the introverted feeler, because he's feeling sort of inside of himself, and my partner also has introverted sensing, which again, it all is focused inward. He's very bothered by that, whereas I'm really bothered by things that are external to me, like loud noises and maybe offensive smells and stuff like that, because of my extroverted sensing. So now this brings me to my second function, which is extroverted feeling. How do I know I have extroverted feeling? For a start, when I was young, I could feel everybody's moods and energies, and I would just take them on as my own. When somebody was angry, I got angry. Somebody was sad, I got sad. Somebody was happy, I was super happy. I love that. I have a very positive memory of being in a shop and I had the wrong money, and there was this elderly gentleman behind me, and he paid for my purchase, and he had such a kind energy that I was just filled with this energy, this happy energy for a couple of hours after this experience. But it also was very bothersome to me. It felt like something was infringing on my boundaries, and I feel like I do have strong physical boundaries where I'm not a passive type of person. So this sort of energetic piercing of my boundaries, it bothered me a lot. So when I was younger, I did not kind of accept my extroverted feeling, and instead I worked on my introverted thinking, and I was very logical, very rational. Still, I am very skeptical when it comes to spiritual concepts, and it does take me a lot to believe something. If I choose to believe something, it's because I've received ample evidence that it is so. And this extroverted feeling is something that I had to develop as I got older. So after I finished my degree, I started to work in tourism. I became a tour guide, and so I had to engage with people basically every day of work. It was lots of different people coming through. I had to kind of give them the same story, but at the same time they also wanted to talk about, you know, their own affairs. They wanted to tell me what they had experienced, their own ideas, and so that really trained me to use my extroverted feeling to tune into people to sense their moods and kind of like go with where they're willing to go. And so I am grateful for having been able to do that kind of job, because I feel like it kind of did fill in that blank that I had when I sort of pushed extroverted feeling away from me when I was younger. I mean, it's not like I stopped using it. I was still able to pick up on people's energies quite easily and their moods and so on. So when it comes to introverted thinking and the way it works with introverted intuition, the way I think about it is that it needs to be a very internally consistent logical system, or a system where the logic is internally consistent. So for example, if I read non-fiction, I can't read on until I have figured out exactly what it means, and I have this in a framework where things need to be integrated into. So I need to understand what it is that I'm reading, otherwise I get very frustrated if I don't understand, and if like all this information is coming at me, and then I get overwhelmed easily again if I feel like I don't have enough time to process it. So I'm a very slow reader when it comes to non-fiction, and as such I have a preference for fiction reading, because in a story I don't have this problem. I can just read it really quickly. Whereas my partner, he has both introverted sensing and extroverted thinking, which means that he can process lots of detail, and he can read through a textbook and just sort of pick and mix what he wants to take in, and he can just have lots and lots of information going towards him, and again he won't be overwhelmed unless he also decides to overwhelm himself with processing it all. But he can, what I'm getting at is that he can pick and mix, whereas I cannot. It has to be integrated into this introverted thinking framework. But because of this, I'm also logically consistent, and I can point out logical flaws and errors. And this is the point of contention between us that is the biggest out of all, is when I point out that his logic is flawed, because I perceive in some kind of so he's looking at the evidence, and then I'm like, okay, but what is the internal logic here? Whereas I can be a little bit dismissive with evidence occasionally. Now, I do very much like evidence, but it doesn't take tons of evidence to convince me. It takes like a few decisive points, let's put it that way. And my partner is also not interested in science. His extroverted thinking is his inferior function. Maybe that's to do with it. He's interested in history, philosophy. I guess the only science he's interested in is biology. I feel like it's all these things that have a narrative, that kind of linear thing going on, rather than being very scattered, which again I would connect to the qualities of the INFP and the INFJ, and the preference for being in-depth and broad in scope. So my last and inferior function is extroverted sensing, and one way I can tell in which it is inferior is my indulgences in food. I'm a bit of a comfort eater. I love tasty food, and I am eternally blessed to be able to cook well, so I can just cook nice tasting meals for myself, and I love it. But it also means when I'm stressed, I tend to, indulge in the food a little bit too much, and just make a cup of tea and another cup of tea, and sort of that's almost a way of putting off the task. And this fits absolutely perfectly with my Venus placement, which is in Taurus. So Venus in Taurus gives you great cooking ability, aesthetic appreciation of beautiful things, which I absolutely appreciate the beauty of nature, and I guess I can ignore the discomfort of being ever so slightly damp for the beautiful scenery behind me, but also the love for tasty food. And also because of my extroverted sensing, when I'm going on a nature walk, I can be in a conversation and I can still take in what's going on. So for example, if the sunlight is coming through the trees beautifully, or if there's a little animal, I will always notice it. I will interrupt the conversation in a perfectly ADHD manner and it will point it out. And that is something I'm rather happy with, and it's something now that I cultivated the older I got. So I try to really focus in on those moments when extroverted sensing would pop up and sort of give me that external information. And I'm very happy how it works with being able to take nature without and still being able to, you know, have your thoughts and think about things. Even though, because I'm not essentially dominant, I can only do it briefly at times. I will still be in my head most of the time. It's just those brief moments where I can really jump into it and feel it and, you know, soak up that beautiful scenery and imagery and the sunshine. And that brings me to the way my feeling works. Because I have extroverted feeling, I feel like I'm moved by what's outside of me. I'm moved by beauty. So I can just very easily cry when something is beautiful in nature. Like one time I looked at birches that were at the back of a house and I just cried because I was deeply moved by how beautiful they looked. And of course, music, I pick up emotion from music very easily. I can pick up other people's emotions. Whereas my introverted feeling, it was very much a process of getting to it, digging very deep. And part of that was sort of also going through traumas, dissolving traumas. And my partner, as somebody who's introverted feeling dominant, was a big help in that. So the way I feel things, there's a little tree creeper. Told you so. Anyway, the way my feeling works is it feels like it's buried deep inside. So one example I could give you, my mum phoned me and told me that my grandpa had died and I didn't feel anything. And it's really, really strange. There's a big buffer and you would think, oh, that sounds wrong, not being able to feel anything. But it's a case of having to sit down and take the time to process. And I don't like to cry in front of other people either. So I need to be by myself and then I can, you know, allow the emotion to come up, because it feels like it's so deep inside, because introverted feeling is not kind of like so close to me. But I also feel like now that I've gotten older, I have more and more access to it. So I can just sort of tap into it when I choose to, whereas in the past I had a very hard time. So eventually I had to sit down and, you know, had to cry all the sad tears for my grandpa. Whereas when my cat died, she was 19, I had the whole day to myself and I just, you know, sat all day and cried over my cat, and it was pretty much instant. This is sort of what I consider by pushing away extroverted feeling, like this rejection of people. I was quite a misanthrope when I was a teenager. Whereas through working through my traumas, also to do with people, I was able to kind of like open myself up towards appreciating people and, you know, being able to perceive them as very nuanced and being able to, you know, feel some kind of more universal love for them. Now, in a J-type manner, I am pretty organized. However, I feel that it's something to do with being scatterbrained, and it was totally a coping mechanism that would allow me to stay on top of things. That I love lists, I love bullet points, I love all of that. And I feel like I can easily tap into my introverted intuition. Sometimes I get this thing where I start talking about a topic and introverted intuition sort of draws it all out from seemingly nowhere, but it's probably somewhere lodged in my brain, and it's sort of like these words of wisdom coming out. And it doesn't feel like it's me speaking. It feels like I'm almost channeling something. Like it's the same when I'm painting. I don't feel like when I see the end product, oftentimes, or most of the time, I have felt that it wasn't me who was painting the painting. It was just a process that I was the tool for. Now, just one more note on extroverted sensing, and maybe as well as introverted sensing, because my extroverted sensing is inferior. I feel like that is the reason why I get overwhelmed so easily, and it makes me a highly sensitive person in a slightly different way than my partner. My partner, with his introverted sensing, he is very sensitive to any food that goes into his body, and he has strong reactions to food, whereas I can just pretty much eat anything and have a little bit of stomach pain. It's like I don't really care about it. It doesn't cause me more than very slight discomfort, but I am so sensitive to noises and smells and any external stuff like that. And also a thought on extroverted intuition, which my partner has. He seems to have the need to speak his thoughts out loud or write them down to be able to process them, whereas I never really felt like I needed it, although, to be fair, when I write things down, there's always, it feels like some extra information coming forward that otherwise wouldn't be there. It's sort of like, it does activate different parts of your brain to write, to speak out loud, than just to think. And then just one more very general INFJ thing, which a lot of people reference, which is the INFJ door slam. I guess I put it in a way of not giving other people second chances, which I try to do that. But when I was young, I was very quick to just dismiss people. So I'll give you a specific anecdote. So I had a neighbor and I had a friend in school, and we were all in the same class. And one time, this neighbor said something mean to my friend, and I hated him for the rest of my school time. I was like, no, you have insulted my friend. You are now my enemy. And I basically held on to this grudge until the end of school, pretty much. It's like, I did not like this person, just purely for that. It's sort of like, I guess INFJs are known for being pretty loyal, and that's how it works. This is tangential to one of the points of me knowing that I'm not a type 9, because when there's tension building up in a friend group, I can be the one to cause the big stir, to like do that big one moment, to if I feel like the harmony is not there, you know, to restore the harmony, to basically, you know, just like put my fist down and say that this is enough, now we need to speak about this. So I have done this and have caused falling outs with some of my friends because of this. Because, yeah, I didn't really like the sort of passive-aggressive way that they were behaving. And I'm not really sad about it. I think it was kind of meant to happen that way. I guess you could call that part of the INFJ door slam. But I also do have pretty firm boundaries, interestingly, in a physical sense. So I have a strong sense of justice. So when somebody accuses me of doing something that I haven't done, I'm very, very adamant, up to the point where I don't even care about the threat of physical violence. I'm like, no, I'm not accepting this. This is not fair. And unsurprisingly, I am an Aries sun, which makes me very stubborn as well. Just imagine what it's like as an Aries sun with your equally stubborn Taurus mother, who's also an ISFJ. This is how I know I'm not an ISFJ, by the way. It did make for a lot of conflict, let's put it that way. Conflict, I'm happy to say, has been resolved for the most part. So, and this willingness to be direct and take control, that's sort of a trait of Enneagram 8, which is considered the path of integration for the type 5. So I guess that's a good thing to do for somebody like me. So I would like to go into the difference between the type 4 and type 5 as well. At the core of the type 4, it's more of a trauma of neglect. So without giving away too much, one of the reasons why my partner is a type 4 is to do with his parents, and just like most millennials, his parents were full-time working parents, so he felt that sense of neglect from them, but also quite a typical experience of the intuitive among sensors is that they kind of feel alienated. So it's that mixture of alienation, of the feeling, why am I not normal? Why am I not like others? So the vice of the type 4 is this envy. It's like, I want to be like everybody else. And this is what informs the type 4. And this is also something that I have experienced, but is not as integral to me in terms of trauma as my trauma that is to do with the type 5, of these energies intruding upon me and me feeling overwhelmed by them, and therefore taking a step back to be an observer. Now, why is he a wing 5? I guess in the case of his mother, who was a working mom, she tried to make up for the time lost while she was working, and she was just a little overbearing. That would be my best explanation why he is a type 5. But also, I guess there's the cerebral quality to the intuitives, that they kind of have this preference. So as you can see, there are quite a few nuances between these two types. The very last thing I want to say is about type fluidity. And I've sort of started looking into it more and more. There came a point where I started to feel like, you know, just your MBTI type is not the be-all and end-all, especially since the more I develop, the more I feel myself edging closer towards something like an ENFP and how they would behave. And the ENFP is that the direct opposite of functions to the INFJ. And another thing that made me think of that, we have a friend who we thought for a long time he was an INTJ because a lot of his behaviors would point to that, but then ultimately we figured out that he is an ENTP. And again, INTJ and ENTP are sort of those direct opposites. So I feel like somebody who develops their personality, there's a point where they start going towards the functions that they're not using, or the sort of opposite functions. There is a website called Keys to Cognition, which tells you just how much you're using each function. And when I did the test, I got a pretty even result between introverted thinking, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, and extroverted feeling. In terms of points, so for comparison, it was 29 points for all of them apart from extroverted feeling, which was 30, so there's a slight preference for that. The introvert intuition had 45 points, so that's by far my most preferred, which is still congruent with the INFJ. The extrovert intuition had 35 points, so it's still the second strongest, which is the primary function of the ENFP. And then extroverted sensing had 23, and my weakest function was introverted sensing with 18 points, which it is considered the weakest function of the INFJ, the introverted sensing one, if you believe that they use all 8 functions, which to me makes perfect sense, that each person just uses 8 functions to a varying degree. There is a channel I came across just around that time where I started thinking about type fluidity. And that channel is called Cognitive Personality Theory and is run by a fellow INFJ who also talks about type fluidity. And I'm still trying to watch through all of those videos and get his specific personality theory, which is based on Jung and MBTI, but it's slightly different. Now, there's also socionics, which some of you might be familiar with. I'm still trying to fully understand the concept of socionics, because I seem to be somewhat ambiguous when it comes to INFJ and INFP. Because when I do the socionic test, I test as an INFJ, but from what I understand, it should be the INFP and the INFJ are reversed. It, for the most part, doesn't feature in the way I approach MBTI anyway. So that brings us to the end of the video. Ultimately, I think these categorizations and limitations are there to be transcended, but I feel like these systems give you a valuable roadmap in how to navigate the space, and you know what exactly you should be looking out for. And this is why I find MBTI, Enneagram, and even astrology very valid and valuable in my own life. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe there's some INFJs among you who are watching. Yeah, if you resonated with anything, let me know. Thank you for watching.